Welcome to the Beauty Locker by KLV. Today I have the honor and privilege of dialoguing with my dear friend, Dr. Crystal Blanchard Leonard, or Crystal B. Leonard, as many of you may know. Now, we have known each other since we were kids, but today we have a very special conversation because it'll be uninterrupted and we get to dialogue about a very pertinent, prevalent topic to our time, COVID-19 on Black families. So, with that being said, Dr. Crystal Leonard, would you please introduce yourself to the potential viewers or to all the viewers?
Hi, I'm Crystal, and I have a doctor of psychology in marriage and family therapy. I developed a marital fidelity program for African American married couples. And my research essentially centered on the divorce rate within the African American community, some predictors of infidelity. So obviously it's a marital fidelity program. So the research was focused on infidelity within African American married couples. Some other things, obviously we talked about like predictors of infidelity as that relates to like communication styles, personality styles, and all that stuff. It was from a framework of emotionally focused couples therapy. So that focus and that idea is essentially centered on helping to really facilitate and kind of experience deeper emotional connections. So my program basically kind of has this three-phase process where we are focusing on identifying like what is our mission, what are we doing, right? So there's like this marital mission statement process that's a part of it. And then also understanding like effective communication, because this is one of the things that helps us kind of get to this emotional experiencing. And so we've got to understand what this effective communication looks like. And then once we understand what that looks like, now we've got to develop this effective communication in order to experience this emotional connectedness. So that's a whole lot of stuff. We can go several different directions, but that primarily is what my research was focused on. I am also a board certified behavior analyst. And so I've worked with families, children. I've worked with couples right now, working with families and children with autism. So within my program that I developed, I kind of merged the world of like psychology and behavior analysis. So data is a big thing for me, kind of being able to see like, are we making progress? Like, is this working? And we have the data to show that. So it's really black and white because sometimes it can be a little bit of gray, right? And understanding the mind and the why and how we do things. And so the data really helps it to be a little bit more black and white from the behavior analytics side. So,
Wow. Okay, so for all of you, I am just as impressed as you are.
oh, thank you.
Because I didn't know all of that. Like I said, we've known each other since we were kids, but life has you all over the place all the time. So thank you for all of that. That is amazing. I love you that much more now.
Oh, thank you. And I love you.
So, you already touched on what you specialize in. So I'll move to what my next question. My next question is, in your professional opinion, how do we identify and experience life based on our past experiences in conjunction with our family of origin, which is one of your profession's terms that I'm just now borrowing. So I'm sure you will elaborate on that. But does this not affect how we truly live life abundantly, as it states in John 10:10?
Yeah, so absolutely. Our family of origin is a fancy way of saying like who raised you, right? What you were kind of born into. It may not necessarily be who birthed you. It's who you were raised by, who kind of had an impact in your life and from the early years, throughout teenage years and all that until you kind of go out on your own. So that's your family of origin. That most certainly influences like how we are, how we think, our belief systems, how we parent, the decisions that we make. It's based on what we learned and what we experienced. How we communicate. How we communicate is based on what kind of communication style was in the household when you were growing up. How you experience emotions is primarily kind of developed from what you experienced with your family. It's interesting that we're talking about this today because just yesterday, I was talking with, I say my mom, and my cousin is who raised me. So when I say it may not be your family of origin, may not be who birthed you, but it is who raised you, who impacted your life, and who shaped who you are, and kind of some of the things that you believe, and develop this belief system. I was having a conversation with my mom last night. And so we were basically talking about parenting and some decisions that she made and how that has impacted now what I do from either side of the street. And it was funny because we touched on talking about how we didn't really have that growing up. We didn't sit down and talk and really dive into how this makes you feel and experience emotion and all that. And I was like, I'm 30 some years old, and now we are now experiencing emotion together. And I had to thank her for being vulnerable because that wasn't the culture of our family growing up. My family of origin, the communication style that we had wasn't to sit and talk about things openly, to be vulnerable and to have a safe space. That just kind of isn't what we did. And because of that, so we'll talk about how the family of origin, to the question is how the family of origin kind of shapes who you are, what you do. Because that's not something that I really experienced, of course, as an adult, now I'm like deep in. I've got to talk, got to communicate, I've got to really experience. And so now in my relationships, especially with my husband, he'll tell you it's always, we had this word at the beginning of our marriage where it's like assessment. All right, how's it going? What you thinking? How you feeling? I would just throw out the word assessment, and he knew then what that meant. It was time to talk and say what it is that's bothering you, what's going good, what's not going so good. I didn't like that food that you cooked, but I didn't want to tell you because I don't want to hurt your feelings. Whatever it is, it didn't matter. It was time for an assessment and to talk about, what was good, what was bad, ugly, and different. And so I had to thank her for that moment of vulnerability because that is not what we had growing up. That's not what we experienced. And that in turn shaped how I now experience emotion. I wanted the complete opposite. I wanted to make sure that communication is a big thing, that I experience emotion. And now, of course, that shapes what I do with my daughter. So now, I'm taking that, and it wasn't that, it was just this horrible experience. People can't give you what they don't have. We ended up talking about how when she grew up, she didn't have that either. So if she didn't really experience that, she didn't have that to give me. Now she did try a little bit when she said, oh, we used to, and this is as we were getting a little older with another individual in her life who she was kind of like a mentor who she looked up to, and they would sit down and kind of have these little powwows. Hey, how was your day? What'd you do? She was an adult by the time she experienced that.
Wow.
So people can't give you what they don't have. You do what you can from what it is that you do have. And so what she had was what she had. So in terms of how we experience things, how we do things, it comes primarily from what we've experienced. Whether you go along with what it is that you experienced or you go the complete opposite, it's shaping what you do, right? So I hope that kind of gets into some of that. I don't know, we can kind of dialogue on, opinions on whether or not it's impacting you and it influences you, because it does impact you. That's why there's a need for therapy and for, so many different things, because it affects us. It impacts us.
It does. It's funny that you say y'all had a conversation just last night, because I had a conversation with myself about that same thing, like all the things that I didn't quite learn growing up. I didn't figure those things out until I was out of that house and experiencing life as a young adult. And it's just like, wow, man, but they can't give you what they don't have. So that's absolutely a fact. And it wasn't horrible. It's just some things you miss along the way just because of, they didn't have it. So that to say, I'll segue into another question that I have. According to a quote that I recently read in Marriage Matters, which is a book by Dr. Anthony Evans Sr., it stated roughly 50% of all marriages in America, whether Christian or non-Christian, end in divorce, which means that there's a huge percent of single parent homes in the African American community. I'm sure there are in other communities as well, but particularly our community. Now, I'm not certain as to when that data was pulled. I know you're a data person to place in that book, but this is alarming. Statistics such as these have damning effects on the African American community as a whole. So effects that could result in generational therapy. And I mean by that, some type of therapy for everyone, all involved, but usually do not result in productive, fruitful therapy for a number of different reasons. So in your experience, in your professional experience, personal experience, what are some of the barriers preventing African Americans from choosing therapy?
Oh, that is a loaded question, as are the data. And so one of the main things, and if you type that question in Google or any search engine, the first thing that's going to come up, and in my research, because this is a part of my research as well, what are some barriers to therapy? And stigma, right? So there's a stigma attached to this idea of seeking help, mental health services, right? Because now that means that, I've got some mental health issues,
Right.
because we put mental health into this like dirty bucket. And we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. We've got spiritual health. We have financial health and wealth. Like there's so many things that we all have. We all have this thing, but somehow mental health is put into this dirty down. There's a stigma attached. And if I acknowledge that there is something wrong within this particular bucket, then that's damning. That's something that can't be, right? I'm not strong anymore. Now I'm weak, right? So there are some preconceived notions that go along with this idea of seeking mental health services or help in any way, right? So that's one of the main things, within the African American community. The other thing is religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I go and get help from a therapist, that means that I don't really believe that my God is big enough to deal, right? So then it's like, well, no, I'm just gonna go and pray this thing away. I'm gonna go to church and I'm, go and get a little oil thrown on me and I'll be good, right? But the reality is that once you leave those walls, right, or once you leave that prayer meeting or whatever it is, you can easily still get back into this place, right, where your mental health is so heavy and it's weighing you down. You still need some other outlets. That is not to say, because our God is big, right? Like he can do anything. However, he also gave us some other stuff, right? So we have to make sure that, the idea of religion being the only thing that can help us when it comes to mental health, we have to be able to say that it's okay to do both. Like I'm gonna go pray and then I'm about to go and see my therapist. About to log on and go see my therapist. And if I got a good one at the end of it, we gonna do some praying together.
Right.
So that's another thing, right? That religion and depending on where you stand in that could be a barrier for some people, because it's like, oh, if I go, they gonna think that I don't really believe like I'm supposed to believe.
Right.
So I can't really go. And then if I really go, that means I'm saying that I'm not strong. Now I'm weak, right? So then we have this Superman, Superwoman complex. We've got this imposter syndrome. We've got like all this other stuff. And it becomes a barrier, right? So, those two things are like, also, I kind of talked about those in my research. Another thing is like cultural implications. So when, we're talking about even just considering therapy, one thing that a lot of people have said is within the African American community is that, well, there's not really, somebody who's going to understand where I'm coming from, because most often it's this idea that the therapist is going to be white, or they're not going to have any cultural similarity. They're not going to really understand where I'm coming from, because the culture of being Black is its own thing. There's so many areas that, a culturally sensitive therapist or provider has to be aware of in order to make sure that they're being effective, especially with someone within the African American community, because my family of origin, it may not be what you think it is. I was raised by my aunt and my cousin, so you start talking about these things and it's like, oh yeah, but this looks a little bit different from me. So we want someone who understands that, right? So cultural similarity is another barrier, because people are like, nope, they don't really have any people that look like me that's going to be able to help me. So in that area alone, they're not going to be able to do anything for me. So cultural similarity, now it's more out in the open, right? So it's like it's a little bit more of a positive light that we can seek therapy, and now there are more therapists and more providers that look like us, and so people feel a little bit more comfortable. But traditionally, generally, like, that has been something that has kept people from seeking services. And then, of course, socioeconomic status, like the depravity of services within certain communities, access to services. We know that there's a racial divide when it comes to services and things like that, and receiving services. Just being aware and knowledgeable of different services that are available to us, that's not always, given to us. So just access to resources, cultural similarity with providers, the stigma attached to it, your religious background, what you believe, all of these things can be barriers to seeking services.
Wow.
So it's loaded, right? It's a
It's
lot.
heavy. It's a lot, man.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. That religion piece is really huge. It's like, what do I do? You're toggling back and forth. Well, they might say such and such, or they might. So, wow. Don't be afraid of mental health services if you need it, people. We're currently experiencing a specific kind of trauma as a people, as a community, with COVID-19. It's hit our culture hard, quite hard, and drastically impacting an already broken down family structure and presupposed healthy family structures as well. So, what are a few insightful ways that you would assist families with rebuilding from the trauma if they were your clients, whether that's COVID-19 or just already broken down just from heavy stuff?
I think the first thing is acknowledging the perils, acknowledging your pain. That's the first thing, because as long as we don't acknowledge it, there's nothing we're going to do about it, right? It's not there, it doesn't exist. I think the first thing is acknowledging the pain or the perils of whatever it is that you're experiencing. And I think sometimes I say, like, seek help, but you've got to acknowledge it first, right? To even say that you're going to go out and kind of seek help, but acknowledging, like, that this is your pain, this is your peril, this is the problem. Acknowledge that this is a place that makes you feel vulnerable, and then seek help. So there are so many more resources now, especially in this current, state. We have so many more telehealth services. There's so many things that are at our fingertips. It's this idea, you walk into the doctor's office and now it's like everybody's looking at you, or, you walk into there and they're like you're trying to figure out if they thinking what you thinking. And, you don't even got to think about all that. We got like things that's right at our fingertips. We can text. There's text hotlines. There's all kind of telehealth therapy where you don't really have to leave your house to go and kind of seek these services. And so seeking help, because we have so many more resources available to us. Not just that, but just like self-help, right? So there's this idea that, we've got to be everything and all things to everybody, but then we neglect ourselves. So you can't pour, it sounds like a cheap colloquialism, right? So you can't pour from an empty cup,
Right.
right? you can't give people what you don't have. You've got to love on yourself. You've got to fill yourself up before you can kind of hand out some things or help some other people deal with their stuff. So self-help, whether that's, creating a routine, having some structure, especially right now. I'm trying to make sure my little doesn't run in the camera right now because we're doing so many things all at home in the same space. We really have to create some structure, because if we don't, like, we can feel so stretched, especially right now, because it's harder now more than ever, especially like with parenting. There's a book called Parenting While Black, and it's by Don Dow, and basically it's acknowledged. So I talked about acknowledging. It's acknowledging the perils of being an African American mother and the decisions that you have to make, the choices that you have to make, the difficulties of raising a child, and being Black, raising a Black child. It's difficult, and even just with all of those dynamics, now added, to that are the pressures of the pandemic, right? So I got to log on to work. I got to, log the kid on for school. I got to make sure that, we got food over here, and, we got homework done over here. We're doing all these things. I got to make sure I stay connected with people and don't slip into a black hole. Like, it's so many other things that we're doing, and we're being stretched into all of these places. And we have to make sure that we have some structure, we have some routine, we take care of ourselves, do some deep breathing, get some things that really work for you to make sure that you're your best so that you can effectively do these things. And then say no to some stuff. That's a big thing. Like, it's okay. And I think, you talked about, we're in this pandemic, and it's Zooms everywhere, it's this everywhere, and you're doing everything, you're in the living room, and that's your studio, and then it's your classroom, and then it's, we're doing a lot of different things. It's okay to say no to some things. Because we're busier now more than ever. Seriously, say no. If I probably should put that at the top of the list. Say no to some stuff. Take care of yourself before you try to take care of some other people, because it's hard. Eating and exercise are some things that are super important. In terms of really keeping yourself healthy, being mindful of the things that you're putting into your body, because that has a huge impact on your mood, and obviously your health, right? So you feel better, you do better, you feel better, you look better, you do better. It's like all of these things are just connected. So diet and exercise are huge parts of that. They affect our mood, which then affects the things that we do. Having, healthy relationships, making sure that we're not only, on social media all the time, but then we're connecting with people. We're staying connected, with people. And yeah, that brings us, it's a different type of connection now that we're in a pandemic, but it does bring, my phone call with my mom last night, we were on FaceTime, but it was great. I'm like, oh, that was good for my soul. So we have to make sure that we have some connections with people, and seeking what it is that we need. I was talking about the different types of resources, and there's Talkspace.com, which is 24/7, online therapy. There's a crisis text line that, if you're a text person and you just want to seek help, it's called Crisis Text Line. You can go crisistextline.org, and it's free for you to utilize a service. Some people prefer to text, and it says crisis, but you don't have to be in a crisis where you're suicidal or homicidal or whatever it is, or having this major depressive, event. But if you feel like you need some support, that's an easy, free resource for you. If you just need to connect in some way, tell somebody, text somebody about it. There's so many resources out right now that the pandemic has given us, right? So, we can look at it from this perspective of the pandemic has taken so much away, but it has given us a lot, if we really kind of perspective take in terms of the way that we do things. I think you and I have definitely talked a lot about what it has given us in terms of being being connected with each other. So there's lots of different resources out there. I might be jumping the gun a little bit, but speaking on that as it relates to African Americans. So there's this full list of like resources, mental health resources for African Americans specifically. So if you go to NAMI's website, so National Alliance on Mental Health, it basically gives you this entire list of resources that are specific to African Americans. Why? Because this pandemic has affected the African American community in a way that it has not affected other groups and other cultural groups. So if you think about this idea of like the African American family, right? So a lot of times the involvement is multi-generational, right? You've got aunties, you've got grandparents who are, you know, the primary source of childcare. You've got the school system who is a sense of childcare. And now that it just looks a lot different, which causes a lot of stress on the family unit, right? And so this gives lots of resources to kind of take some of that weight of what the pandemic has kind of placed on the family, especially the African American family. There's one on there that's called Black Men Heal, and it's a free mental health resource. So this is specific to like African American men. There's also one that's called Melanin and Mental Health that's for Black women. So there's just like all kinds of resources out there. I think one of the things is, again, you acknowledge that there's some problems, there's some perils, there's some kind of heavy stuff, and then just kind of seek help. Whether that's, you use the text hotline, or, you do some telehealth where you just from the comfort of your living room, or, just kind of reading through some different resources that are out there, because there's a lot of stuff out there.
Right. Especially right now, because it's the holiday season. We're approaching the holiday season. The holidays this year look different. So just know that you're not alone. There are resources. Find someone. Just don't go at this thing by yourself. Most importantly, God. He is there. He's alive. He's well. His word is living and breathing. You can get in that Bible. And I know some people may not feel that it is on time or it is tangible, but it is tangible, if I can put it frankly. So,
Absolutely.
plethora of resources.
Yeah.
And I think we would agree, Dr. Leonard and I, we would agree that prayer changes things. Trust and believe. But if that's not enough for you right now, then you can lean on another resource. So with that, my big question, as we get ready to close on this amazing dialogue, this amazing conversation, what is the one thing, if any, that almost made you quit? Whether that's your profession, your ministry area, or your marriage. And this is in no way to insinuate that that's ever been the case, but if there were one thing, what is that one thing?
Ooh, I'll say, the thing that makes it difficult to fight, because we're always in this fight, whether you're fighting to stay in, whether you're fighting to do your best, like you're working hard. I'd say the thing that has made it maybe difficult to keep fighting is when my focus starts to shift to be on the problem, and really focusing incessantly on the problem as opposed to the solution. So I'm very solution focused, meaning that, we look at and we acknowledge the problem, and then now we're going to move into how that's impacting. And now we're going to talk about the solution, right? We're going to get to a solution for this problem. So usually I'm just kind of like, okay, like here's a solution for this thing. But there are times when I take that hat off and I can focus incessantly on the problem. And when I do that, when you start to focus on the problem and what's going wrong, you're ready to throw the towel in. It's such a dark place. That's all you see are the deficits. And it makes you want to get out versus dig in. And so those are the times that I've had to really fight to shift, to focus on the solution and to dig in and not try to get out, because then that really puts me like in a dark place to where it's like, you know what, I don't want to fight. I don't want to put in the work or the effort. And so the thing that will has put me there before is focusing on what the deficits are, the problems are, and not saying, okay, let's try to find a solution. let's figure out how we can have these steps kind of placed in order to get to this place that we want to get to, whether it's professionally, whether it's personally, whether it's in my marriage, like literally, like, okay, let's have this game plan. And now I'm energized and now I'm ready to do it. Because, on the side of just focusing on the problems, like you can really like pierce, the process by really just focusing on the negative, the barriers, the perils and the deficits, saying like, this is all you see, right? But then once I shifted to saying like, okay, this is where I want to be. How am I going to do it? What's the solution? Now I can see the light. Now I've got some drive to get to where I want to be. So I would say, when my fight starts to dwindle because I focus so much on maybe the negative or the deficits, that is when it's really difficult to stay in the game, to push, to keep going, to run the race, as my friend says. It makes it difficult when the focus is primarily just on what the problem is.
Right. Wow, that was awesome. Dr. Crystal Leonard, married, toddler daughter. So she is a very busy person. And I am very grateful. I am honored. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet me at the Beauty Locker and talk about all these heavy things. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Thank you for this beautiful platform where you're highlighting these things. It's definitely necessary. I appreciate you and your perspective because you're always intertwining so many things from, the personal to professional to our spiritual. So that's always necessary too, like to make sure that we're always keeping our minds, where God is the center and these other things, are all connected. So I thank you for the opportunity and the platform and for this unique and beautiful perspective.
You are very welcome. We will talk soon.
Absolutely.
See you later.
Later.